Dr. Younes is way more famous than to need my introduction. However, in this crowd, in this home, in the University of Manitoba Faculty of Engineering, he mainly emphasized, because the majority of you guys are quite young, I'll give you a little bit of background information about Dr. Younes. He got his MD in Alexandria University in Egypt, 1962. Am I allowed to say the year? Or?
Yeah. 51.
Right, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't reflect your true age. Not at all.
I graduated when I was 5.
For sure. That makes sense, actually. And he did his residency as well and Ph.D. after residency in Magdy University. Then he did fellowship there too, in Magdy, yes. And then he became an assistant associate professor in general medicine in Magdy University, then went to University of Texas, and then in Pathology University. I must say that I don't know what brought Dr. Younes to Winnipeg, but whatever it was, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that.
My wife was born here.
So, a special thanks to right, a special thanks to Pat. I'll give her in person tomorrow night. And after that, since then, Dr. Younes has been in Manitoba, and it is indeed one of our biggest assets in sleep medicine. For me, who have been having the honor of working with Dr. Younes, without any exaggeration, Magdy is like a Bible in sleep medicine. And I'm sure that many of the colleagues in medicine agree with me, although they're not in this room. But that's the way that we look at Dr. Younes. So I'll keep the introduction short. And please join me to welcome Dr. Younes.
I am not an engineer, okay, so I cannot pretend to teach you anything useful as far as engineering is concerned. But I want to take you through a trip I went through over the last 30 years, just so you can get a sense of the hurdles that you might face when you get into developing medical devices, especially those that affect the health of people who use them. But before, I also want to thank you for putting a 12-year-old picture on the lecture announcement instead of the more recent one. So, in any case, before we go into the main topic, I just want to put it in some engineering context. Are you mostly electrical, mechanical, what? Or
Most
neither?
electrical, I would say.
Most electrical?
Well, a number of them are BME, biomedical, but their background is electrical, and some of them are under-electrical.
Okay, so I will try to make it a little bit interesting from an electrical standpoint. All right. So we start with a little bit of anatomy. This is sort of a cross-section like that of the body. Can you see that?
Yes.
And what we see here inside the chest cavity are a couple of lungs. These lungs are made up of millions and millions of little bubbles, which you can look at electrically as capacitors. You know, the more you apply voltage across the pressure, voltage in respiratory pressure, the more they take air. So we have millions and millions of little capacitors there in parallel. So we can say they are like two big capacitors. And within each of these capacitors, we have these little tubes that start out at the little bubbles, and then they start joining up together. and then finally they get into these two big tubes, and then the main tube, which is the trachea that we have here. So you can look at this as big capacitors, and the resistors, there are millions of them in parallel at the beginning, and then they become fewer and fewer, and then finally it ends up being one, but you can consider it all as one resistor for all intents and purposes. So these are the things that we breathe with. They expand and they collapse. Now, where is the power coming from to expand them and let them collapse? It's coming primarily from this muscle, which is called the diaphragm. The next picture shows you what the diaphragm actually looks like. It looks like a parachute, but you can also look at it as a piston, right? So when it contracts, and here it is within the chest, you can see it starts from down here and goes up and makes a dome and then comes down again. And so the diaphragm, which is the main muscle, has to be activated somehow. So think of this as a pump, the diaphragm as a pump, and it has to be activated by some control system. The control system for the diaphragm is up there in our head, and it sends the information through these two cables, which are called the phrenic nerves. You can see the phrenic nerves coming here and branching into the muscle. So that's how the diaphragm gets activated. Okay, so here is the controller in our brain stem. This is a tiny, tiny little piece of brain. That's where you get shot in the back at this point. There's instant cessation of breathing and death. So that's the controller. That's the cable that goes to the diaphragm. The diaphragm is up there when it's relaxed. Now, if it gets activated, what is going to happen is it's going to go down because the muscle fibers shorten. So when it shortens, it comes down. And when it comes down, what did I do? When it comes down, it generates pressure. Of course, it's going down, so it's generating pressure down, which is called PMUS, or the muscle pressure. Now, as you can see, as it comes down, it increases the pressure below in the abdomen. That's why the abdomen goes out. But most of the pressure is actually, because there's not that much pressure in the abdomen, most of the descent causes negative pressure in here. And now that will, you can see the negative pressure of this tube, and that will now tend to expand the lungs. We represent the lungs here as elastic bands. The more they are expanded, the more they fight back. So think of this as a certain voltage applied to a capacitor and a resistor. If you start negative pressure here, we'll get to that in a minute. So I put it also in a mechanical model. Here is the controller in the brain. Here is the phrenic nerve, that's the cable. Think of the diaphragm as a motor, that when it gets activated, it pulls this way, PMUS. It pulls the piston down, and that has to fight against these springs and against this resistance. Any problem so far? No? Very simple, huh? Okay. Yes? Good. All right. You have to be careful because I'm setting you up for tough questions later on. So, around the middle of the lecture, I'm going to ask you a tough question about how to do it. And if you can't do it, I will declare myself a legal engineer in Manitoba. So, even though I have only grade 9 math. So, what does the activation of the diaphragm look like coming down this phrenic nerve? It's not a constant activation, because obviously if you constant activation, the diaphragm will stay down there and there will be no air going in or out. And that's the same thing that kills us sometimes. The heart has to beat like this because there's only one channel in and one channel out. And if it keeps contracting like this, that's constant systole, there is no blood being pumped. And the same thing in the lungs, in the respiratory system, we have only one tube to breathe in and out from. And therefore, the activation of this muscle is intermittent. And that's how it looks like. Here is the raw activity in the nerve, which is just as you see like that, it sort of ramps up. This is the moving average of this activity. Again, you can see the ramp up, and then it tends to stop pretty quickly. This is the pressure generated in the chest, and you can see that it parallels very much the activation of the nerve. So there is very good agreement between the activation of the nerve via that cable and the pressure generated by the muscles. All right? Now, this is just one breath, but I can show you a tracing with four breaths in a row. Again, you can see this ramp reaches a peak and then comes down pretty quickly. There's a quiet period here. You can also see the variability. Here, there are three breaths that are fairly stable, but then the patient decides to make a bigger effort to get a deeper breath. The control system in the brainstem is an extremely complex control system, highly respected by at least myself. I mean, you can work on it for 200 years and you still can't scratch the surface of how it works. It is connected to every square cubic millimeter in the body. It knows everything that is going in and it reacts to it immediately and appropriately. So this breath, for example, reflects that the controller got some input from somewhere that says, I need to get some more air. For example, you can move your arm a little bit like this and you get a big breath because you need to get a little more oxygen to supply the oxygen that was used for this movement. So it's a highly sophisticated control system, but this is the basic pattern: a ramp followed by a rapid decline, a pause, and then the cycle repeats. So this is the pattern of activation here, and I have this little sketch here to show you just a sample example. So when the breath starts, this is the heavy line here, it is going to pull this way weakly because that's a low activity. But remember that the springs at the beginning of inspiration are not very stretched. This is the resting volume of the lungs. So most of that force is going to be translated into a negative pressure in the chest. Is that clear? Because the capacitor is not charged yet. So most of the voltage you apply to the circuit is going to be used to generate flow. Is that straightforward? Yes, is that straightforward? Like, or am I too simple? Yeah, okay, we'll come to that. But, oops. Okay, so at the beginning of the breath, most of the force is used to generate negative pressure, which pulls a lot of air in. But as the breath continues, see now we are up here, it's pulling harder, but a lot of the force is used against the springs, and the flow goes down, and then finally, when it starts going down, the springs are stretched, they are charged, this one stops, and the pressure rises, and we start exhaling. So here is the mechanical model, and now we come to the electrical model, which I think you prefer. So here is the controller. Ahmed told me this is what you guys call that system, a power stage supplied by a battery. Is that right? That is okay. So here is the diaphragm along with the battery. Here is really the food supply to the diaphragm. The diaphragm itself is made up of millions of little fibers that you can think of as little motors arranged in series. So the more of them and the healthier they are, the more pressure the diaphragm can generate. Now, so this waveform, if the power stage is normal, would look exactly like the electrical activation. That's a one-to-one transfer, say. But we have here an inverter because if you apply positive force here, it generates negative pressure. So we have an inverter here which converts the positive pressure here into a negative intrathoracic pressure. And then we have these two capacitors and the two resistors, and then the common resistor, which is the trachea, and then ground. So again, if the power stage is activated like this, flow will start going in, and when it goes down, the capacitors will cause flow to go out. Is that okay? Tell me if I'm moving too fast, too slow. So now I'm simplifying a little bit more because two capacitors in parallel can be modeled as one capacitor, and all these resistors can be modeled as one resistor. So we have the same model. And we're going to generate, do you understand now why this waveform is like this? When the activation is going up, the flow goes up and then comes down as the capacitors get charged. And then when it stops, the capacitor causes flow to go in the opposite direction until it goes back to its resting stage. All right? So that's our electrical model. So I have it up here because we need to go forward. So this is a healthy system, everything is fine, and now why do people have to go to the intensive care unit and get put on a ventilator? There are many reasons to do that, but if we apply it to this electrical model, one of the reasons would be that this power stage has become weaker. So you can simulate it as the battery, which normally can give you 100 volts, is now down to 30 volts. Which may be because the blood supply is poor, or because the muscles, the enzymes in the muscles are not working properly, or whatever. So what do you think is going to happen to the flow output here? Nothing else has changed. What do you think will happen? Not amp. What would it look like? This, in other words, I'm going to simplify it. In other words, now this same electrical activity is going to generate less muscle because now the transfer factor is not 1 anymore. So in this case, the muscle, the pressure generated or the voltage generated from the same activation is going to be 30% of what it's supposed to be. Okay, this is a simple circuit, guys. What's going to happen to the output?
We're going to have a smaller group.
A smaller?
A smaller group, a smaller
Will it look like this, or would the shape change? Just be smaller. Perfect. Okay, so what is going to be is something like this. You agree? All right. Now, so that's one of the common causes of respiratory failure, is failure of the muscle, which is the power stage. And that would be someone who has ALS or muscular dystrophy or many of the metabolic disorders, kidney failure, liver failure, and so on. All these diseases can cause weakness of the diaphragm, and it cuts down the amount of pressure or the amount of voltage it can generate. The second, and probably, the commonest main factor, is that the capacitor goes down. For example, you have now two capacitors. Maybe one of them gets completely filled up with fluid, or two halves of the two capacitors get up completely filled with fluid, like heart failure, for example, or pneumonia, or kidney failure. So think of it as maybe half of these little bubbles get filled up with fluid, so they can't fill up anymore. So it's like you replace the big capacitor with a smaller capacitor. So what do you think will happen to this? Same now, the brain is still activating the same way, the muscles are generating the same pressure, but now the capacitor is much smaller. And if you don't know the answer to this, what will happen here?
The V in the bottom will be straight almost.
Speak, I'm a bit deaf.
The V in the bottom, I don't know how you call these things, they'll be straight probably, or near the zero line.
So will it look like the heavy line?
No, the first part will look the same, the second part will look...
Okay, so but basically peak is going to go down, but the shape is going to change a little bit. You know, like you're right, it's going to rise up a little faster and come down sooner. But basically, you're going to have, less flow and less air going into the lung if you reduce the capacitor, such as, like I say, what might happen with pneumonia or heart failure or one of these things. The third possibility, you must have guessed it by now, is that the resistor has gone up, which can happen, for example, in asthma, or if, you know, it's what's called COPD, smoking, a lot of smoking. And that, what that will do is also will reduce peak flow, but it may shift the shape a little bit, will change the shape a little bit, but all of them are going to reduce the flow that is resulting from the same activation of the diaphragm. Most commonly, all three factors are present in the same patient. So we can have the muscle being unable to generate enough voltage or pressure, resulting in poor transfer factor, compliance is down, and resistance is up. So that all accumulates, and what we may end up with now is something like the pressure generated for the flow generated, the current generated for the same activation may be 1/9 or 1/10 of what it is ordinarily. And that's when you start now, how can the body compensate? We have a wonderful controller. If the flow goes down, we're getting less air in our body, the carbon dioxide rises, the oxygen falls, it stimulates the controller. So what the controller does is to increase this output, to try to bring it back to whatever is required. So, but this one has, it's like, think of it as a battery, and there is a limit to how much you can increase the output of this battery. If you take from it more than it can be supplied by the blood supply and so on, it will ultimately fail. The battery will go empty and it will fail. So there is a limit to how much the controller can compensate for this. And once that limit is reached, we know the patient is going to die unless you support his ventilation by giving him an assist. So that is the principle of mechanical ventilation. Is once the patient gets to a point where the increase in activation cannot be sustained and there is an imminent failure happening. Once it happens, within minutes the patient dies. So it is that you have to anticipate it and try to help the patient get back to the normal flow with not as much increase in activation. Okay, so here is the same diagram. Now we've decided that this patient is really so sick, he's got so many problems, and he's in imminent danger of dying. So we're going to have to put him in the ICU, and we're going to assist him. So here is the same patient. Now we're going to get him in bed and put in a ventilator from the storage room. And the ventilator is sort of like the mirror image of this. Here is a power stage also. It generates pressure or voltage, and it is controlled. There are buttons there on the ventilator. You can set it in 100 different ways. And I will show you what you can do with it. So now we need to connect the patient to the ventilator. We can't obviously keep the ground here. So we have to connect the ventilator to the patient, and the only way we can do that is to put a tube down the patient's throat, which means we're adding another resistor there, which is called the resistance of the endotracheal tube. So now we have another resistor here, and we move the ground here, and we have to add a switch to it. Now why the switch? Because the ventilator, just like the diaphragm, has to give pressure intermittently. So it gives the pressure and then it has to let go to allow the lungs to empty. So the pressure is by the ventilator is also intermittent. So we have to allow for the lung to empty. So what all ventilators have is when it is the positive phase, they are pushing pressure, they have to close that switch to the ground so that all the current goes to the patient. And when the cycle is finished, And according to the controller, it says stop now, don't give more pressure. So the pressure disappears and the switch opens to the ground so that the patient can empty his lungs. Okay, now we connected the patient to the ventilator, and I just want to introduce you to some terms. This is PMUS. This is the pressure generated by the diaphragm, which basically is the output of the power stage, considering how healthy it is. And there is P-vent, which is the pressure generated by the ventilator, and that's the positive voltage on the outside of the circuit. The question is coming soon, okay? So be careful. So I'm going to show you a bunch of slides that have these terms. PMUS is this one. That's what the patient is generating. P-vent is what the ventilator is generating. This is flow or current. This is volume, which is the integral of current, which is the charge and the capacity. Any problems so far? No? This is a study I did about 40 years ago in 24 patients that were sedated to measure their PMUS, or what we call here P-occlusion. And this is to show you the spectrum of the output of this respiratory muscle. Okay, every one of these is the average of many breaths in one patient. And so you can see that the amplitude, this is in centimeters of water, but you can call it voltages. The amplitude can vary from a few to 50. The shape can vary a lot from curve this way to curve that way. The duration can vary from something that long to something that short. The whole idea here is to show you that not everybody is the same. And the message I want to give you is that all ventilators, until this method I will tell you about, have been functioning on the assumption that one size fits all. And that's one of the big problems of conventional ventilation. You set it to the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you need that much or that much. So that is the range among different people. This is an old study again from '79 in France on 235 normal subjects. Let's say a 70-kilo person, and it shows you the variability in the breathing pattern that we want. It's not all the same. So let us take a 70-kilo person. Some of them may want only to have 300 ml, some may want a liter or more. On the other hand, the rate at which they breathe can vary from 10 to 25, or sometimes 30. So we are not all the same, and if you watch, I used to do that in lectures, watch people breathe, not necessarily my lectures, because people didn't go drowsy. But in other people's lectures, I would count the breathing. And some of them will be breathing at 8, some will be breathing at 20, and these are normal, healthy students. So one size doesn't fit all. Within the same individual, every time I'm making a little movement like that, my brain says you need more oxygen. So if you exercise, you need more oxygen, and the controller increases the amplitude of its activation in a very characteristic way. Initially, if you're walking a little bit, not too fast, it will increase it like this. Just doesn't change the shape, increases the amplitude. If you walk a bit faster, it's going to do that. And then you reach a point where if you start shortening, as you increase the peak, you start shortening the duration of the activation. And that usually means respiratory distress. When you get to that level, and that's why it's been sort of ingrained in doctors' minds that the high respiratory rate is synonymous with distress. So within the same person, the pattern of activation will differ from time to time depending on what you're doing. within the same person, in the same state, there is a lot of breath-by-breath variability in the output. So this is how PMUS is in the patient. Inside, it's varying between patients, in the same patient at different times, at the same time, from breath to breath. Now, we come to what are the patterns of event. So we now know what the patterns of PMUS are. What does the controller here allow us to do? There are two basic patterns with a lot of variations. One is called volume cycle, and here is flow, and here is volume. Now what you set the ventilator to do is give you a certain flow up to a certain volume, at which point then the cycle terminates. Now, what do you think is going to happen to the pressure here? You told the ventilator, I want you to give me this current up to this voltage. And then stop. What do you think the pressure is going to look like? Come on, guys. Give you 3 guesses.
Increasing ramp.
Would be like a ramp? Okay. So I'll show you some examples. So this is volume cycle, and what you can do is you can set it to different higher flow or lower flow, higher volume, lower volume. You can change the shape from flat like this to sinusoidal or descending. So these are the controls on the ventilator. The other basic mode is pressure cycle. Here, when the ventilator is triggered, the pressure rises quickly to a certain level and then it stays constant. So what happens is flow immediately goes up and then it comes down, volume goes up, and now here is the problem. Well, how do you know where to stop? Where to stop? There are an infinite variety of ways to do it, and basically we're messing in the dark because we don't know what the patient's doing. We don't know when the patient's cycle is going to end. So in some modes you can stop it at a certain time. In other modes you stop it when the flow goes down to a certain point or at a percent of peak, and there's a whole variety of these things. But there is no way you can ensure that whatever you set it at is going to coincide with when the patient actually ends, that they are synchronous. So the other important variable is the rate at which the patient is breathing. I told you that can vary from 7 or 8 to 30. The rate of the ventilator is set by the physician or by the respiratory therapist. So what happens if they are not? So the first ventilators I worked with about 40 years ago, there was no linkage between the vent and the patient. In other words, everyone was going at its own rate and there was absolutely no synchrony. So what you got was just total fighting between the patient and the ventilator. The ventilator is pushing when the patient is trying to inhale, is trying to exhale, and vice versa. There was just nothing there. It was just, you had to paralyze the patient. Now with more modern ones, the ventilator doesn't start giving positive pressure until it sees current going this way by the power of the patient. So it waits until there is current going into the patient. And so he is now trying to start in, I start the cycle. So that is called synchronized assisted ventilation. But that synchronizes, if possible, the beginning of the ventilator cycle. But you look here, this is synchronized, and you can see it's just a mess. And that's why anytime somebody goes on a ventilator, even in the assisted modes, you have to sedate them so that they don't fight the ventilator. So what happens? I'm going to skip these. What happens here? We go to your. This is a volume cycle ventilator, and the controller is programmed to give this pattern of flow. And so you said it was going to be what? Is that what you expect? So look at this. The patient is pulling here. He's not getting much assist. The assist actually comes when the patient. Why is that? Because when you have two power sources and you tell the controller, I want the same current, when one power is up, the other has to go down, right? Because the total voltage difference has to be the same. So, is that clear? So this is not a bad ventilator. Here the patient tried to take a deep breath, and what you see is he got nothing. Why he got nothing? Because his own power source was working harder. But you are telling the ventilator, I don't want you to go up, the current cannot go higher, so the ventilator has to go back. So this is a case of paradoxical relation between, in other words, the more the patient wants, the less assist he gets. This is the problem with volume cycle ventilator. Pressure cycle is a bit better because it gives the pressure which stays pretty constant until it terminates. So here again is an example of 3 breaths, and then the patient took a deeper breath. Now the patient is making more voltage, the ventilator is making the same voltage, so you're going to get a little more flow. But any increase in flow, it's going to be at the expense of the patient. But we know that the patient has trouble making flow because that's why he is on a ventilator. So he can't really compensate as much if he wants to. So here, these are the problems with conventional ventilation. The other problem, of course, is, as I told you, when do you stop the cycle? You see here, it was set to stop at a certain % of the peak. Look where it stopped. It stopped way after the patient stopped his effort. Further, when did, I'll go here, if the cycle terminated almost when the next breath is about to start, remember the capacitor is fully charged. The pressure generated by the patient has to first overcome the voltage that's in the capacitor before it can generate any flow. So you see now that the patient started the effort here. Here, the ventilator didn't start kicking until near the end, which is when the voltage generated by the patient managed to overcome the charge in the capacitor. So these are the problems with conventional ventilation. And I'm going to skip these. This is just to show you the problems we have. These are sedated patients because otherwise you would be fighting. And you can see the problems you can get. Here is a 3-to-1 rhythm. You get 1 breath for every 3 efforts by the patient. So you can get serious problems there. Okay, here comes the question. This is obviously a bad state of affairs when you have this total non-synchrony and fighting and you have to sedate the patient, because sedation is a terrible thing in critically ill people. There is a very, very good relation between how much sedation the patients get and how many of them die. So it's not a trivial issue that you have to sedate the patients to keep them comfortable. So here is the question I started with. How can we get the ventilator pressure to be proportional to PMAS? Like I said, if you can't answer this, this is a simple control system. Then I'm going to declare myself the dean of engineering. Yes?
Why don't you look at that PMUS signal? If that's what you're trying to synchronize it up with, why don't you use that as your input for the controller and the ventilator?
How do you get it? You have to put a catheter in.
Yeah?
2 catheters in. One above the diaphragm and one below the diaphragm, and measure the voltage difference, and that would be the directly measured PMUS.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. That's tough. It gives you a very unstable signal, and you can't drive a ventilator with an unstable signal.
But you were showing, like on your previous slide, you had a nice measurement of PMUS. You were just showing us how it happens.
You can have it nice like that for about 10 minutes, and then very complicated putting catheters in and leaving them. The patient's going to be there for 7 or 8 days.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, that's the obvious solution, but I want you to, but that's not a very practical. So how do we, what you can measure is P-vent. You can measure the current back and forth. You can measure the integral of the current, which is the charge in the capacitor. Can you do it with this information? Yeah? How? Okay, I'm going to simplify it because you can't easily do it without some... here is the equation for this system. The total voltage applied across the system is the sum of this and this. It gets inverted, but you can say plus, minus, minus. The total voltage is the difference, is the sum of this and this, or the difference between this and output of this. It is dissipated against the flow, which is the current, multiplied by sum of these two resistances, and the volume, which is the charge in the capacitor, divided by the capacitance. So this is what we want to control, and this we cannot measure, but we want this to be proportional to that. Okay, I'm going to make it even simpler, although I didn't have it that easy. But let's say we can measure C and these R's. So we can measure flow, we have values for resistance and values for capacitance, and we can measure volume. How can we get this to be proportional to that? All right, so I'm smart. Here. If we tell the ventilator, give me pressure here to be a percent of this term. This term is the total voltage difference from here to here. And we tell the ventilator, and we have all this information, give me a percent of this term. So what will happen if you set this percent at 25%? The ventilator will be giving at any instant 25% of the total voltage. The patient has to be giving 75%. So if one goes up, the other one goes up, right? If the patient pulls harder and increases flow and volume, then this term increases and P-vent will increase, right? And then, but they have to go in the same proportion. So if you set it, so now if you set it 25%, the patient is contributing 3/4 of all the voltage. The proportionality is 1.3. And amplification, in other words, you've increased, it's as if you've increased this by 30%. If you set it to be 50%, then it's even, 50-50, the proportionality is 1:1. In other words, the ventilator is giving 1 centimeter for every centimeter the patient is giving. And the amplification is 2. 75%, now you get into 25 from the patient, 75 from the ventilator, and you're amplifying as if you're amplifying this solid line by 4 times. So that's how you're saving the patient from having to do it himself, but you're allowing him to be free to control the ventilator. It is the difference between this and the conventional ventilation is sort of, I like this example, having a very old truck driver driving a huge truck with no power steering. Okay, and he wants to turn left. Every time it senses that he wants to turn left, it turns the wheel for him 60 degrees. If he wants to go 30 degrees, he has to fight it. If he wants to go 90 degrees, he has to make the difference on his own, but he has trouble doing that. This one becomes like power steering. Anytime the patient stops his effort, here, this ventilator is going to stop its effort. So they are totally synchronized, and if the patient increases his needs more, it's going to give it more. So this is the principle of what's called proportional assisted ventilation. It's basically a sleight of hand, and it is a control system. Then the next few minutes then will be about, okay, so you have this formula, how do you implement it? And the problems I had to go through to do it. That happened when I just came back to Canada from Texas about 30 years ago. And the MRC was in deep trouble at the time, and I got only 30,000 grant. So I had to build a system that can implement this formula, because you can't get a life support ventilator from a company and go into its control system and put a new formula. I mean, that just is not practical. So I had to build my own ventilator. And that is the first PAV ventilator. I have it in my basement when you come to visit. It's based on a rolling steel piston, which is a discarded spirometer from the pulmonary function lab, 10 liters. At the time, in the mid-80s, the mainframe ventilators, the mainframe computers were being discarded because the laptops came on, and there were linear motors. We bought this for $15 from a junkyard. The laptops came around mid-80s, I think they became popular. And so there was that linear motor driving this piston very fast. If you know linear motor, very fast. So it could change the pressure very quickly. But because of that, because the system is basically a positive feedback system, we had to create a very complex feedback circuit so that it becomes stable. And I just want to show you the response of this mechanical system. This is the drive input, and this is the pressure output. The phase shift is only about 30 seconds. This is here testing its frequency response. That's the voltage in. And we go from 10 breaths, 10 per minute to 60 per minute, which is the whole range of human breathing. And you can see there is no attenuation at all. So that to this day is the best PAV system developed. And we used it because I couldn't obviously take something like that to the ICU. It didn't even have wheels. Until we got something that we can take to the ICU, we used it for research in people that can walk into the lab, and we got a lot of papers out of it. But finally, we decided to go into the ICU, but based on the same mechanical principle, this big 10-liter spirometer with a huge linear motor that weighed 80 pounds. This is actually an interesting story about this. The frame, which was made of cast iron, this is about 4 feet, 3 feet by 4 feet by 1 foot wide. The frame, which was made of cast iron, weighed about 100 pounds. At that time, I think Antonis's son was working as my student. That was back in the mid-80s. And one day, he was building it in his dad's garage, the cast iron. And one day, I was driving to work on Sherbrooke, to the Health Science Center, and who do I see but his son on a bicycle, carrying this thing on his back. In any case, so this is what we took to the ICU. It's basically inside, it's the same as the other one, weighed about 300 pounds. And we managed to study 5 patients before it died. Because I had only one half-time technician graduate from Red River to help me with this. I mean, I had no money to give. But in any case, we managed to do 5 patients and confirm the principle. So this is a patient then where we monitor PMUS. Again, you can only do that for half an hour or something like that. But to show you that how the ventilator pressure was tracking the patient effort. This is a swallow, so you don't have to worry about this. You see, when he makes a big short effort, he gets a big short breath. When he makes a wide effort, when he makes a small effort, he gets a small assist. So that shows that it was working. Now, when we took a patient that was on, I showed you this picture before, which was like a mess, on volume cycle, put him and switch him to PAV, look what happened to his breathing. Okay, so patient is much more comfortable, and so that confirms the principle. And the thing that we then did with these 5 patients is to compare how much pressure or voltage they need to keep their oxygen normal with the volume cycle ventilation, and then we switch them to PAV, keep them on PAV for a couple of hours, and then back to volume cycle. You can see that they need only about half as much pressure. And this is very important because how much you distend the lung, it has serious consequences in terms of what you call barotrauma. If you stretch the lung too much, it's just like filling the capacitor, overcharging the capacitor. It starts leaking and breaks down. So that was very important at the time. So I decided to submit, to present this at the American Thoracic Society many years ago. In the meantime, there was a new program by the federal government called the Centers of Excellence, which was designed specifically for taking stuff like that, getting academics to develop things and actually this particular system, PAV, was very instrumental in the respiratory network across Canada getting a multi-zillion-dollar grant, at which time I could hire a very senior engineer or two and start having custom-made ventilator so we can take it. And then we wanted to follow the same mechanical design here by getting a rolling seal piston, but we wanted it small, so we did a smaller motor, and we called companies that make rolling seal pistons. None of them would deal with us because they move its life support system. They wouldn't give it. And then other people told me that FDA would never approve rolling seal because if the seal breaks, rolling seal is a very flimsy kind of seal. If the patient again, there'd be serious problems. So we were a real setback, and I was kind of pacing the floor one time. I got this idea, I don't know how, to develop this piston, which is a cylinder, and the piston itself the diameter is only a few microns smaller than the cylinder, and it is made of the same metal, so that the temperature. So basically, we just had a capillary space between the piston and the cylinder, with a very sophisticated system, as you can see, of centering the rod in the middle, so it doesn't scratch. And that we developed here in the local shop, and with the help of the engineers I had, then we built this Winnipeg ventilator, which was very small, and we could take to ICU and it looked really nice. And we built 28 of these with the help of the Centers of Excellence and distributed them internationally. And at that time, I think I have to stop here. There are many lessons I wanted to tell you about. One of them, quickly, once I presented this and they came and saw that ventilator, several companies just came in the private jets, and it was just the whole world was a buzz, because this is the first time the patient is going to have control over his breathing in the ICU. The companies wanted an exclusive license, and I said, no way I give anybody an exclusive license on this. This is too important. I mean, this is how you feel when you've come up with something you think is the most important thing in the world. So I said, no way. Well, that turned out to basically almost kill the whole thing, because it is a very different kind of ventilation. they're not going to accept it. And this is exactly what happened. So they knew that it would require a lot of expenditure in clinical trials and stuff like that to get approved. And who is going to do it first if it's non-exclusive? Why should one company spend $10 million to prove the thing, and then as soon as it is approved, everybody else will do it? So that was a big problem. On the other hand, I said that the frictionless piston is not very important. It's just a better mousetrap. And they gave one company an exclusive license. What do you know? They took the license for both of them, one exclusive, one non-exclusive, and they developed the exclusive one, the piston. And it's one of the best-selling ventilators, but they developed it as a ventilator for the third world. So because it doesn't need any pressurized source, it has its own, it works with batteries. It can be a transport ventilator. So they didn't develop it for the purpose either, which is to deliver path. They developed it as a cheap third world ventilator. No, third dimension, which is now completely. And that is what is generating the money that's actually supporting the company. It's the frictionless piston, not PAV. Now, PAV, we went through different issues that I can't get into right now, but finally we resolved all the problems. Then of course they managed to put it on their flagship ventilator. FDA refused to allow it because the section of the FDA that was responsible for approving this was headed by an anesthetist who does not believe patients die to control the breathing. So they refused. So it stayed there for about 10 years until the leadership changed in the FDA, and it was immediately approved after that. Now the doctors are fighting back, saying, well, the breathing, as I told you, different people want different ways to breathe, but the doctors are conditioned to have a certain pattern of breathing that they are used to for the last 40 years. So when the patient's not breathing the same way they like, they say this is not a great mode of ventilation. So it's still an uphill battle and will require a lot of research to get it. But I mean, it is on every ventilator now that is sold by Covidian. But it's not used very much until we prove that the patient really knows the control system here, which is much more sophisticated than any control system that you can have that doesn't hurt the patient. So ongoing, and that is the story of this battle. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Licensing and the story behind your method. Dr. Younes has had many patents on the design of ventilator, and his design ventilator is one of the most sold one. And our TPO, in fact, made quite a fortune by
The university?
yes, the university of yes. But that's good to make money that way.
But it's hard. It's hard.
Yes.
It's a long. What the message is you may think you have a great idea, but before you invest time and effort, you've got to do your due diligence and find out whether there's a need for it. If there is a need for it, whether it's going to be useful, whether it's going to be accepted, whether there are companies that are willing to go through the trouble of doing the validation for you and selling it. It's a very not to be taken like ideas are only 10% of. I think someone told me that only 3% of patents ever make it
That's true.
to realization.
Only 3, but there are many patents.